The young Hollywood star called Dean Martin old-fashioned and outdated. Dean's response taught him why legends become legends, proving that true talent never goes out of style, and that arrogance is often cured by a masterclass in professionalism. It was Tuesday morning, April 8, 1969, at Paramount Studios, and the cast and crew of Airport were gathering for their first table read. The film was one of the most anticipated productions of the year, a star-studded disaster epic that promised to showcase Hollywood's biggest names in a story that would test both their acting abilities and their capacity to work together under pressure. Dean Martin had been cast as Vernon Demarest, a veteran airline pilot whose experience and calm professionalism would be crucial during the crisis that formed the movie's central plot. At 51, Dean was at the height of his career, with a string of successful films, a hit television variety show, and a recording career that continued to produce chart-topping albums. The cast assembled that morning represented 3 generations of Hollywood talent. There were established stars like Burt Lancaster and Helen Hayes, character actors who had been working steadily for decades, and a handful of younger performers who were being given their first opportunities in major studio productions. Among the younger actors was 24-year-old Michael Sterling, a recent graduate of the Actors Studio in New York, who had landed a significant supporting role as a young airport employee caught up in the crisis. Sterling had appeared in 2 off-Broadway productions and 1 small independent film, but Airport represented his first major studio contract and his introduction to the kind of big-budget filmmaking that could establish him as a serious Hollywood player. Sterling was tall, handsome in the brooding style that had become popular among young actors, and carried himself with the intense seriousness that method acting teachers encouraged in their students. He had strong opinions about what constituted authentic performance, dismissive attitudes toward what he considered commercial entertainment, and an unshakable belief that his generation of actors was destined to revolutionize American cinema. As the cast members took their seats around the large conference table for the reading, Sterling surveying his colleagues with the appraising look of someone who was categorizing them according to his own theories about acting and artistic legitimacy. When his eyes landed on Dean Martin, Sterling's expression showed the kind of barely concealed disdain that suggested he had already decided that Dean represented everything that was wrong with traditional Hollywood entertainment. The table read proceeded smoothly for the first hour, with each actor bringing their own interpretation to the material, and director George Seaton making notes about pacing, character development, and the technical challenges they would face during production. Dean's reading was characteristically effortless, bringing a natural warmth and authority to his character that made it clear why he had been cast as the experienced pilot who would provide stability during the crisis. His delivery was conversational but compelling, professional but relaxed, exactly the kind of performance that had made him one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men. During a break in the reading, while the other actors were discussing their characters and sharing coffee, Sterling approached a group of younger cast and crew members with the air of someone who had important insights to share. "I have to say," Sterling announced, his voice loud enough to carry across the room, "it's fascinating to see how different generations approach the craft of acting." Several people turned to listen, including Dean, who was reviewing his script at the far end of the table. "Some actors," Sterling continued, "come from a tradition where the goal was simply to be charming, to project a likable personality rather than to truly inhabit a character. That approach might have worked 20 years ago, when audiences were satisfied with surface-level entertainment, but modern filmmaking demands something more authentic." Sterling paused, making sure he had everyone's attention before delivering what he clearly considered to be a profound observation about the state of contemporary cinema. "Today's audiences want to see real human emotion, genuine psychological depth, characters who feel like actual people rather than polished entertainment products. They want actors who are willing to dig deep to take risks, to bring truth to their performances, rather than just hitting their marks and delivering lines with old-fashioned charm. Dean continued reading his script, but several people in the room were beginning to understand that Sterling's comments were directed specifically at him. The problem with the old studio system approach, Sterling continued, warming to his theme, is that it created performers instead of artists. People who could sing and dance and look good on camera, but who never learned how to access genuine emotion or create authentic character relationships. Sterling's voice carried the confidence of someone who believed he was educating his listeners about important artistic principles. Method acting, the approach that serious actors use today, requires you to draw from your own emotional experiences, to find the truth of a character by connecting it to your own psychological reality. It's not about being smooth or charming or entertaining. It's about being real. George Seaton, who had been listening to this impromptu lecture with growing discomfort, decided to intervene. "Michael, I think we should probably get back to the reading." But Sterling wasn't finished making his point. "I'm just saying that there's a difference between old-fashioned entertainers and contemporary actors, between people who perform for applause and people who perform for truth, between talent that's designed to please and talent that's designed to challenge audiences and make them think." The room had gone completely quiet. Everyone present understood that Sterling had just delivered an insult disguised as artistic commentary, and that his target was Dean Martin, who was sitting 20 feet away and had heard every word. Dean closed his script, stood up from the table, and walked over to where Sterling was holding court with his impromptu audience. "Michael," Dean said, his voice carrying the same warm conversational tone he used for everything. "That's a really interesting perspective on acting. I'd love to hear more about how you approach a scene." Sterling's expression showed surprise and pleasure, apparently interpreting Dean's response as validation of his artistic theories. "Well, Dean, the key is emotional honesty. Finding the psychological truth of a character by accessing your own authentic feelings and experiences." Dean nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. So when you're playing this airport employee who's dealing with a crisis, you draw from times in your own life when you've experienced fear or uncertainty." "Exactly," Sterling replied, encouraged by what he interpreted as genuine interest in his methods. "You can't fake real emotion. Audiences can tell when an actor is just pretending versus when they're accessing genuine psychological material." Dean smiled, the expression of someone who was enjoying a conversation about professional techniques. "Michael, would you mind demonstrating? Maybe show me how you'd approach the scene where your character first realizes something's wrong with the airplane." Sterling's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had been given an opportunity to showcase his superior training and methodology. "I'd be happy to." Sterling moved to the center of the room, took a moment to prepare himself using the internal techniques he had learned at the actor's studio, and began performing the scene with intense psychological realism. His interpretation was technically proficient, emotionally committed, and exactly the kind of serious, method-based performance that acting teachers praised and critics respected. When Sterling finished, the room applauded politely, and he looked pleased with his demonstration of contemporary acting technique. "That was very impressive," Dean said. "Really authentic and emotionally honest. Now, would you mind if I tried the same scene? Just to see if an old-fashioned entertainer can access any genuine psychological material?" Sterling's expression showed confidence mixed with curiosity, apparently eager to see how Dean's supposedly superficial approach would compare to his own deeper methodology. "Of course," Sterling said. "I'd love to see your interpretation. What happened next would be discussed in Hollywood circles for decades." Dean approached the same scene that Sterling had just performed, but instead of the intense psychological preparation that method actors used, he simply began acting with the kind of natural, effortless authenticity that made it impossible to tell where Dean Martin ended and the character began. His portrayal of the airport employee was simultaneously more believable and more compelling than Sterling's technically perfect but emotionally calculated performance. Dean didn't appear to be accessing psychological material or drawing from personal experiences. He simply became the character, bringing a level of truth and spontaneity that made Sterling's approach look forced and artificial by comparison. For 3 minutes, Dean demonstrated exactly why he had been one of Hollywood's most consistently successful performers for 2 decades. His acting wasn't showy or intense or obviously skillful. It was simply real, in a way that made everyone watching forget they were watching someone act. When Dean finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Sterling stared at Dean with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of acting had just been quietly but completely revised. "How did you do that?" Sterling asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dean's response was delivered with the same warmth and humility he had shown throughout the entire encounter. "Michael, I think you're absolutely right about emotional honesty being important. But sometimes the most honest thing an actor can do is stop trying to prove how deep and serious they are, and just trust that the character exists without forcing it." Dean paused, making sure Sterling understood that he was receiving a lesson rather than a criticism. "The truth is, Michael, there's no old-fashioned way or new-fashioned way to be authentic. There's just being present with your character and trusting that if you really listen to the other actors and really believe in the situation, the performance will take care of itself." Dean looked around the room at the other actors, many of whom were nodding in recognition of principles they had learned through years of experience. Every generation of actors thinks they discovered something that previous generations didn't understand. But good acting has always been about the same thing, making the audience believe that what they're watching is really happening, whether you're doing Shakespeare, or a disaster movie, or a romantic comedy. Dean returned to his seat, signaling that the impromptu acting lesson was over. The remainder of the table read proceeded with a noticeably different atmosphere. Sterling's arrogant commentary about different generations and superior methods had been replaced by respectful attention to the work, and his subsequent interactions with Dean showed the kind of deference that comes from recognizing genuine mastery. During production, Sterling sought out opportunities to observe Dean's approach to different scenes, gradually understanding that what he had dismissed as old-fashioned charm was actually a sophisticated level of professional skill that made difficult acting look effortless. Years later, when Michael Sterling had become a successful character actor in his own right, he would always credit his experience working with Dean Martin as the moment when he learned to distinguish between technique and talent, between what looked like serious acting and what actually was effective acting. "Dean taught me that the goal isn't to impress people with how hard you're working or how deep you're digging," Sterling would say. "The goal is to make them forget you're working at all. That's a lot harder than what they teach you in acting school, and it takes a lot more real skill than most young actors understand." If this story of professional humility and the difference between technique and talent inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs to know that true mastery often looks effortless, and that dismissing experience in favor of theory is usually a mistake. Have you ever had your assumptions about someone's abilities proven wrong? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the moments when arrogance meets authentic expertise.